What if the one person you were taught to mourn, the romantic hero of your life story, never actually existed? What if the beautiful tragedy that defined your past was nothing more than a shield, a carefully constructed lie designed to protect you from a truth far more chilling than his fictional death? For Maya Linwood, a 21-year-old waitress clinging to the frayed edges of solvency in New York City, her history was an anchor in a turbulent sea. Her mother, Evelyn, was a saintly memory of music and laughter. Her father was a ghost, a brilliant but penniless pianist who had died in a tragic accident just weeks before she was born. It was a story etched into her heart, a sad, sweet lullaby she had known forever. But on a cold, rain-lashed Thursday night, inside the gilded cage of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, a single impossible photograph in a billionaire's wallet would shatter that lullaby into a million discordant notes. The woman in that faded image, her head thrown back in a cascade of joyful laughter, wasn't just a stranger's memento. It was her mother, and the man holding it was about to rewrite every line of her life, revealing a story not of tragic romance, but of terrifying sacrifice and a love so powerful it had to be buried alive. The low symphony of clinking glasses and muted power brokering at the pinnacle was the soundtrack to Maya Linwood's exhaustion. Perched 62 floors above the glittering sprawl of Manhattan, it was a world of starched linen, hushed reverence, and patrons who viewed a $1,000 check as a minor inconvenience. For Maya, it was a nightly tightrope walk between politeness and poverty. At 21, her world was a third-floor walk-up in Astoria with a flickering fluorescent light in the kitchen, a stack of overdue textbooks for a music theory degree she'd been forced to put on hold, and the quiet, constant hum of anxiety over her grandmother's mounting medical bills. Her life was an endless loop of memorizing wine pairings, forcing a serene smile while her feet screamed in protest, and clearing plates laden with food that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. The one constant, the single unwavering truth in her precarious existence was the memory of her mother, Evelyn. Evelyn had been a pianist, a woman who could coax heartbreaking melodies from the battered upright piano that now sat dormant in her grandmother's living room. She had seen music in the rhythm of the city, in the patter of rain on a fire escape. She had passed away when Maya was 16, a sudden, brutal illness that had stolen her away, leaving behind a box of sheet music, a well-worn silver locket, and a love story that formed the very foundation of Maya's identity. The story, as Maya knew it, was her genesis. Her father, a gifted but destitute concert pianist, had met Evelyn in a smoky Greenwich Village jazz club. They had shared a whirlwind, all-consuming romance. Two artists united against the world. He was killed, the story went, in a horrific multi-car pileup on the I-95 a month before Maya was born. Her mother had spoken of him with a wistful, shimmering sadness, describing a love so perfect, so complete, that she never even considered finding another. Tucked inside the locket Maya wore every day was the only photograph she had of her mother in that time. A candid shot, Evelyn's head was thrown back in laughter, her eyes alight with a joy so pure and unbridled it felt like a captured sunbeam. Her father, Evelyn had told her, took that picture during a walk through Central Park, the day he asked her to marry him. Tonight, the pinnacle was practically vibrating with tension. The source of it was seated at table 1, the prime corner booth that offered a god's-eye view of the city's electric veins. Julian Croft. The name was synonymous with power, a monolith in the world of global finance. His face, often scowling from the cover of Fortune and Forbes, was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. With steel-gray hair at his temples and eyes the color of a winter storm, he radiated an aura of such intense, coiled energy that it seemed to bend the air around him. He was dining alone, a rare and ominous event that had the entire staff, from the busboys to the sommelier, on high alert. Maya's hands, usually a telltale sign of her nerves, were surprisingly steady as she approached to refill his water glass. He was hunched over his phone, his thumb swiping with a brutal efficiency that suggested he was dismantling lesser companies between courses. "Will there be anything else for you this evening, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice a practiced, neutral melody. He emitted a low grunt, a sound of pure dismissal, before his hand moved to the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He withdrew a wallet, not of flashy alligator skin, but of old, supple black leather, softened and worn with years of use. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, Maya thought he was preparing to settle the bill and release the restaurant from his gravitational pull. But he didn't pull out a credit card. He flipped it open to a clear plastic insert, his brow furrowed in concentration. And then for Maya Linwood, the world fractured. Her breath snagged in her throat, a sharp, painful thing. The polite waitress smile on her lips froze and cracked. Her heart began to pound against her ribs, a wild, panicked drum beat that drowned out the restaurant's decorous hum. There, illuminated by the soft, strategic lighting of the pinnacle, nestled behind a thin, scratched layer of plastic, was a photograph. It was small, its corners softened with age. The color slightly faded to a gentle sepia. But it was unmistakable. It was her mother. It was the exact same candid shot from her locket. The same angle, the same unrestrained laugh, the same sun-drenched, radiant joy in her eyes. The picture Evelyn had said was taken by her father, the penniless pianist, on the happiest day of her life. Time seemed to stretch and distort. The clatter of cutlery faded to a dull, distant roar. All Maya could see was that impossible sacred image in the hands of this cold, ruthless billionaire. How? A copy? A bizarre coincidence? But the specific way the light hit her mother's hair, the tiny, almost invisible crease near the bottom edge, it was identical. A perfect, impossible twin to the image she held against her heart every day. He was about to snap the wallet shut. A raw, primal scream of instinct overrode years of training, of being polite, invisible, and agreeable. Her hands shot out, her fingers trembling as she pointed at the wallet. The words tumbled out of her, raw and shaky, shattering the restaurant's quiet reverence. "Sir, excuse me, sir." Julian Croft looked up, his stormy gray eyes clouded with annoyance, with the impatience of a king interrupted. "What is it?" Maya swallowed, her throat as dry as sandpaper. She pointed again, her finger more insistent, more accusatory. "That photo, in your wallet." His eyes narrowed. A flicker of something unreadable, surprise maybe or anger, crossed his chiseled features. He moved to close the wallet, to conceal the image, to end the intrusion. "No, wait," she pleaded, her voice cracking, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "Please, where did you get that picture?" He stared at her now, his expression hardening into a mask of cold, dismissive fury. "That is absolutely none of your concern, young woman. Now, if you'll excuse me—" But she couldn't let it go. Her heart felt like it was being torn in two by a confusion so vast and violent, it was a physical agony. This man, this stranger, this titan of a world her mother had despised, was carrying the most precious relic of a love story that defined her entire existence. Tears, hot and insistent, welled in her eyes, blurring his formidable face. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that stripped away all pretense of server and patron. The entire restaurant, with its captains of industry and their bejeweled wives, might as well have vanished. It was just her, him, and the ghost in the photograph. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising with a desperate strength she didn't know she possessed. "That photo, that's my mom." The declaration hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass, heavy as a tombstone. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Julian Croft didn't move, didn't breathe. His face, just a moment before a fortress of cold indifference, was now a raw landscape of unfiltered shock. The annoyance in his eyes was gone, swept away by a deep, searching confusion that seemed to churn in their gray depths. His gaze flickered from the worn photograph in his wallet to Maya's tear-streaked face, then back again, as if trying to reconcile two impossible realities. He was seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as an anonymous waitress, but as a person, a living, breathing enigma that had just been hurled at him from across a divide of 2 decades. The restaurant manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Dubois, began to scurry over, his face a contorted mask of apology and panic. "Mr. Croft, is there a problem? I am so terribly sorry if my staff has disturbed you in any way. Croft raised a hand, a short, sharp gesture that stopped Dubois dead in his tracks. He didn't take his eyes off Maya. Her own eyes were wide, pleading, shimmering with unshed tears that magnified their color. A distinctive hazel green, flecked with gold. Just like hers. The stubborn set of her jaw, the way her brow furrowed in distress. It was like watching a ghost come into focus. "What?" he asked, his voice low and dangerously steady. "Did you say her name was?" "Evelyn," Maya choked out, the name a painful whisper. "Evelyn Linwood." The name struck him like a physical blow. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his powerful shoulders. But Maya saw it. He slowly, deliberately, closed the wallet with a soft click and placed it on the table. He looked at her again, and in that instant, the billionaire titan vanished. In his place was a man staring at a specter from a life he had long ago encased in scar tissue. "Leave us," he commanded Dubois, his tone leaving no room for argument. The manager nodded nervously and retreated, shooting Maya a look that was equal parts terror and white-hot fury. She knew, with a dull certainty, that she was fired. In that moment, she couldn't have cared less. Julian Croft gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request. Her legs felt like they were made of cotton as she numbly sank into the plush leather seat. The transition was dizzying. One minute she was a servant in this world, the next she was a guest at its most exclusive table. It was utterly surreal. He leaned forward, his large hands clasped on the table. The cufflinks on his crisp white shirt were understated platinum. "Tell me about her," he said, his voice now softer, laced with a raw, buried pain that resonated deep in Maya's own chest. "Tell me about Evelyn." And so she did. Through stilted sentences and shaky breaths, Maya painted a portrait of the mother she knew. She told him about Evelyn's love for the piano, how their small apartment was always filled with the sounds of Chopin and Debussy. She told him about her infectious laugh, her fierce independence, her sudden, cruel death from a brain aneurysm 5 years ago. A tragedy that had shattered Maya's world. And then, hesitantly, she told him the story, the myth. "She said my father was a pianist too," Maya explained, twisting a linen napkin in her lap until the threads began to pull. "A brilliant one, but they were very poor. She said they were madly in love, but that he was killed in a car accident before I was born. She said he took that picture of her." As she spoke, Julian Croft's expression grew heavier, more pained. A deep, sorrowful shadow fell over his features. He didn't interrupt, but the silence that followed her words was dense with unspoken history. Finally he spoke, and his voice was rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "The story she told you, it was a kindness, but it was not the truth." Maya's heart seized. "What? No, my mother wouldn't lie to me." "She didn't lie, not entirely," he corrected, his voice gentle. "She just changed the ending, and she changed the protagonist." He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades of unresolved grief. "My name is Julian. Your mother used to call me Jules. I was not a concert pianist, Maya, and I did not die in a car accident." He paused, letting the impossible weight of his words sink in. He reached across the table and slid a heavy, embossed business card towards her. "I took that picture on a Sunday afternoon on the Great Lawn in Central Park, 22 years ago." Maya stared at the card. It read, "Julian Croft, CEO, Croft Global Investments." Below it was an address for a skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a building that was a landmark of modern capitalism. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion and fierce, protective denial. "I don't understand," she whispered. "My mother, she loved my father. She mourned him her entire life." "She did love him," Julian said, his voice thick with a strange, agonizing mix of grief and certainty. "But the man she loved wasn't a poor musician who shared her ideals. He was the one thing she taught you to despise. He was me." The very foundations of Maya's world began to crumble. This man, this cold, calculating predator of the corporate world, was claiming to be the romantic, tragic hero of her mother's story. It was impossible. It felt like a desecration of Evelyn's memory. I don't believe you, she said, her voice gaining a sharp, defensive edge. He looked at her with an expression of profound, soul-deep sadness. I don't expect you to. Not yet. He stood up, his towering presence seeming to fill the entire space. He placed a thick stack of $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover his bill and the trouble she was undoubtedly in. Come to my office tomorrow, he said, his gaze intense and unwavering. 10 o'clock. There are things you need to see, things that will explain. It's time you knew the whole story, Maya, not just the beautiful, tragic lie your mother built to protect you. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her sitting alone at the table, his business card a dead weight in her trembling hand. The truth, he'd said. But as she stared at his retreating back, a cold dread washed over her. She had a terrible feeling that the truth was not going to set her free. It was going to burn down everything she had ever known. The next morning, Maya woke to the shrill beep of her alarm, feeling as though she'd been run over by a subway train. The bizarre, dreamlike confrontation at the Pinnacle played on a loop in her mind. A curt clinical text message from Mr. Dubois confirmed what she already knew. Your services are no longer required. Security will have your final paycheck and personal effects at the service entrance. Fired. Yet the loss of her job, which should have sent her into a spiral of financial panic, felt distant and insignificant. All that mattered was the heavy, cream-colored business card on her nightstand and the gaping, ragged hole that had been torn in her life's narrative. Could it possibly be true? Could this billionaire, a man who represented the very system of power and wealth her mother had railed against, be the long-lost love of her life? Dressed in her only presentable outfit, a simple navy blue sheath dress and worn-out flats that felt wholly inadequate, Maya felt like an imposter as she stepped into the lobby of Croft Global Investments. It was less a building and more a monument to wealth, a cavernous cathedral of polished granite and shimmering steel. The air itself smelled different, a sterile, expensive scent that whispered of power and influence. When she gave her name to the receptionist, a woman so perfectly poised she seemed sculpted from ice. The woman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A moment later, she was directed to a private elevator with a newfound, almost fearful respect. The elevator ride was a silent, dizzying ascent into another world, the city shrinking below her. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a vast, minimalist office. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a view so panoramic it felt like looking at a map of the world. A stern-looking woman with perfectly coiffed gray hair and an impeccably tailored suit stood to greet her. Miss Linwood, I am Beatrice Vance, Mr. Croft's executive assistant. He is expecting you. Beatrice led her to a set of massive oak doors and opened one, revealing Julian Croft standing by the window, looking out at his kingdom. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable, almost guarded. Today, in his own environment, surrounded by the trappings of his immense power, he seemed even more formidable. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice softer than the night before, though still laced with a certain caution. He gestured to a seating area with leather armchairs that probably cost more than her grandmother's entire apartment. Please, sit down. Maya perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The silence was thick with 22 years of unanswered questions. I know this is difficult to process, Julian began, taking the seat opposite her. Evelyn was a remarkable woman. She was also fiercely protective and incredibly proud. He leaned over to a beautiful antique credenza and picked up a large leather-bound photo album. He placed it on the coffee table between them and opened it. Maya's breath hitched. The first page was filled with pictures of her mother. Not just the one from the wallet, but dozens. Evelyn on a sailboat, the wind whipping through her long, dark hair. Evelyn covered in paint splatters from a disastrous attempt at redecorating their first apartment, grinning mischievously at the camera. Evelyn and a much younger Julian, his arms wrapped around her, both of them radiating a happiness so pure and unguarded it was painful to look at. In every photo, she wore the same radiant smile, a smile Maya had only ever seen in that one solitary picture in her locket. We met at a small recital in the village, Julian said, his voice a low, nostalgic rumble. I wasn't the man I am today. My family had money, yes, old money, but I was trying to make my own way. Investing in nascent tech companies, a field my father considered little more than glorified gambling. To everyone in my world, I was the black sheep, the rebellious son. To Evelyn, I was just Jewel. He turned a page. There were photos of them at picnics, at hole-in-the-wall music clubs, on a road trip to the coast of Maine. It was a life Maya had never imagined for her mother, a life filled with a man who was clearly, deeply her partner. She knew about my family, he continued, his gaze distant. But she didn't care. She hated that world. The charity galas, the insincere pleasantries, the endless jockeying for position. She called my parents' home the Gilded Mausoleum. All that mattered to us was what we had together in our tiny fourth-floor walk-up with the leaky faucet. Maya felt a growing sense of dislocation. The man her mother described was a poor artist who shared her bohemian lifestyle. This story, backed by a mountain of photographic evidence, was entirely, fundamentally different. Why? Maya finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Why would she lie? She told me my father was dead. Julian's face clouded with a deep, ancient pain. Because in a way, she needed him to be. Our relationship, it wasn't a fairy tale. My parents, particularly my mother Eleanor, did not approve of Evelyn. They saw her as a distraction, a gold digger from the wrong side of the tracks who would derail my future, a future they had meticulously planned for me since birth. They put immense, unbearable pressure on me to end it. So you did? Maya asked, a new bitter anger rising in her chest. You chose them over her. No, he said, his voice firm, his stormy eyes locking with hers. I never did. I chose her. 100 times over, I chose her. He reached into a drawer in the credenza and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was not a flashy diamond, but a simple, elegant engagement ring with a single perfect moonstone, a stone that seemed to capture and hold the light. This was her favorite, he said softly. She said it looked like captured music. I gave this to her on that day in the park, the day I took that photograph. She said yes. Maya stared at the ring, her mind reeling. Engaged. Her mother had been engaged to Julian Croft. This wasn't just a different story, it was a different universe. We were going to disappear, Julian explained, his voice thick with a regret so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. Leave New York. Forget my family. Forget their money. We were going to move to Oregon. She was going to teach music. I was going to manage my small portfolio of investments remotely. We had it all planned. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the memory was a fresh wound. And then one morning, I came home from a meeting, and she was gone. Gone! Vanished, he said, opening his eyes again. They were filled with the haunting ghost of that loss. All her things were gone. The piano was silent. There was a note on the kitchen table. He paused and his jaw clenched. It said she'd met someone else, someone from her world, that what we had was a mistake, a fantasy, and that she couldn't live a lie anymore. It was clinical, cruel. It wasn't her voice. He looked at Maya, his expression a mixture of grief and a new, unsettling suspicion. I searched for her for years. I hired private investigators. It was like she had dropped off the face of the earth. I never knew why she really left. I never knew about you. Are you sure, Miss Linwood? Are you absolutely sure you're her daughter? The question was a slap in the face. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture Maya didn't want to see. Her mother hadn't been abandoned. She had run away. And this man, her supposed father, didn't believe her. He thought this could be some elaborate long con. I don't believe this, Maya said, shaking her head, the denial a desperate shield against the pain and the insult. She loved my father. She wouldn't have just left him. She wouldn't have written a note like that. That's the part I've spent 22 years trying to understand, Julian confessed, his voice breaking slightly. I thought she loved me too. He looked so lost, so broken in that moment, that for the first time she saw past the billionaire. She saw the jewels from the photographs, the young man whose heart had been shattered. But his doubts stung, creating a new wall between them. There has to be more to it, Maya insisted, more to herself than to him. There has to be a reason. She stood up abruptly, her body thrumming with a nervous, frantic energy. I have to go. She fled the office, ignoring Julian's call of her name. She ran from the sterile lobby, from the oppressive wealth, from the story that threatened to erase the woman she thought she knew, and from the man who saw her not as a daughter, but as a potential threat. She needed proof. Not his proof, with his glossy photographs and his lingering suspicion. She needed her mother's proof. Somewhere in the small apartment that was her last remaining link to Evelyn, there had to be an answer. There had to be the truth. The taxi ride back to Astoria felt like a journey across dimensions. Maya stared unseeingly as the gleaming, indifferent towers of Julian Croft's world gave way to the familiar grit and humanity of her own. His story echoed in her mind, a compelling, heartbreaking narrative that fought against the bedrock of her own history, now further complicated by his final cutting question. Are you sure you're her daughter? The words were a torment. He thought she was a fraud. He believed the cruel note. He didn't believe in the woman she knew her mother to be, the woman who had taught her about loyalty and fierce, unconditional love. Could that woman truly have been so cruel as to abandon the man she loved with a lie? It didn't fit. There was a piece of the puzzle missing, a crucial piece that would make sense of the impossible and prove to Julian who she was and who her mother was. Her grandmother, Elena, was sitting in her worn armchair by the window when Maya let herself into the small, cluttered apartment they shared. Elena's memory, ravaged by the slow, cruel tide of dementia, was a fragile thing, a collection of shimmering moments that would appear and vanish without warning. Today, however, her eyes were clear. You look like you've seen a ghost, my Kutsa, she said, her voice raspy, the Romanian endearment of familiar comfort. Sinking onto the ottoman at her grandmother's feet, Maya told her everything. The photograph, the confrontation, the surreal meeting in the penthouse, the story of a love that didn't die but was abandoned, and Julian's final, devastating doubt. Elena listened, her wrinkled hands stroking Maya's hair. For a long time she was silent, her gaze lost somewhere in the past. The rich boy, she finally whispered, the words faint but clear. I remember. Evelyn was so happy, happier than I'd ever seen her. And then, she was terrified. Terrified, Maya leaned in, her heart pounding. Of what? Of him? No, no, Elena said, shaking her head. Not of Jules. He was a good boy, wild but good. She was afraid of his people, his mother. Elena's eyes for a moment were sharp with a memory. The dragon lady, Evelyn called her. She said she had eyes like chips of ice. One day Evelyn came home from meeting her. She was white as a sheet. She just kept saying, she'll never let us be. She'll destroy him to get to me. A week later, she was packing her bags, telling me we had to leave, that she had to disappear to keep her baby safe. The dragon lady. The words hung in the air, a new and menacing character introduced into the drama. This wasn't just parental disapproval. This was fear, a reason. Grandma, Maya said urgently, after Mom died, I packed all her things. Her music, her papers. Where's that box? In the back of the closet, Draga, where it's always been. For the next several hours, the small apartment became an archaeological dig site. Maya pulled a large, dusty cardboard box labeled Evelyn's Memories from the closet. It smelled of old paper and dried lavender. For 5 years, Maya had treated this box as a sacred tomb, too grief-stricken to disturb its contents. Now she opened it with a desperate, almost frantic need to find vindication. Inside was a lifetime of carefully preserved fragments. Bundles of sheet music, mostly Chopin nocturnes and intricate Bach fugues, their pages filled with her mother's elegant annotations. Worn paperback poetry books, a dried corsage, its petals crumbling at the slightest touch. It was a treasure trove of the woman Maya knew, but there was nothing about Julian. No photographs of the happy young couple from his album. No mention of Jules. It was as if that entire chapter of her life had been surgically, meticulously excised. Discouragement began to set in. Maya sank back on her heels, the floor around her littered with the ephemera of her mother's life. Had her grandmother's memory been a phantom? Was Julian's version, the cruel, inexplicable abandonment, the truth after all? Her fingers brushed against the bottom of the box, feeling a false bottom, a slight ridge in the cardboard. Her heart leaped. With trembling hands, she worked her fingers under the edge and lifted. Beneath the main compartment was a hidden space, shallow and clearly meant to conceal. And inside there were two items. The first was a single, folded piece of stationery, slightly yellowed with age. The elegant, familiar handwriting was her mother's. It was a draft of a letter, filled with cross-outs and revisions. With a sense of impending doom, Maya carefully unfolded the page. The second item was a piece of sheet music, but it was different from all the others. It wasn't a printed classic. It was an original composition, written in her mother's hand on blank staff paper. The title was simple, Maya's Lullaby. Maya had never seen it before. The melody looked strange, clumsy. The notes seemed oddly spaced, the harmonies dissonant in a way that was unlike her mother's fluid, lyrical style. It felt wrong. Putting the music aside, she focused on the letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was a confession, a final testament never meant to be found. She began to read. The paper was fragile in Maya's hands. The blue ink of her mother's pen, slightly faded, but perfectly clear. Her grandmother had drifted off to sleep in her chair, the soft sound of her breathing, the only noise in the still, heavy air of the apartment. Maya began to read the unsent letter, her mother's true final words. To my Jules, if you are ever reading this, it means I have failed. It means I wasn't strong enough to disappear completely, to become the ghost I need to be for you. I pray you never find this. I pray you believe the other note, that you curse my name and move on to the life of happiness you were born to live. It will be easier for you that way. Maya paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. This was not a simple goodbye. This was a strategy. I met your mother today, officially, not as the girl you were hiding in your village apartment, but as the woman you intended to marry. You were in Boston for that tech conference. She summoned me to your parents' house. It was not a request. She was exactly as I had imagined. Perfect hair, perfect pearls, a smile that never reached her eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The quietest words can be the most violent. She told me she knew I was a sweet girl, that my infatuation with you was understandable. Then she laid out my future. If I married you, I would be a pariah. Your family society would never accept me. I would be a constant embarrassment to you, a weight tied to your ankles, holding you back from your destiny. She said your father would disinherit you completely. You would lose everything, your legacy, your family, your future. She told me, he thinks his love is enough to protect you, but all it will do is provide a gilded cage for you to wither in, and a legacy of failure for him to endure. I told her she was wrong, that we didn't need their money or their world, that our love was stronger than that. I stood up to her, Jules. I was proud of myself. And that's when she smiled her real smile. It was terrifying. Love is a luxury, she said. Let's talk about necessities. And then she told me what would happen if I refused to leave you. It wasn't about disinheritance anymore. She talked about my family, about my mother back in Romania, an old woman on a tiny pension. How easy it would be for her to suddenly have financial troubles. She talked about my own immigration status, the student visa I had first come here on, how a few anonymous calls to the right people could create a world of legal trouble that a poor music student could never fight. It was all so vague, so polite, and it was the most brutal threat I have ever received. I thought that was the most painful realization, that I was a weakness you couldn't afford. But I was wrong. The most painful realization came an hour later. There's something I haven't told you yet, my love. For the past few weeks, I've been feeling different. I went to a clinic this morning before the meeting with your mother. I wanted to be sure before I told you my wonderful, terrifying news. Maya's breath hitched, her eyes scanned the next line, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. the world tilted on its axis. Jules, my love, we're going to have a baby. The words seemed to lift off the page and hang in the air, shimmering with the weight of 2 lost decades. And that is why I have to leave. I cannot bring a child into this war, a child she would see as leverage, a child whose life she could threaten with a single polite phone call, a child who would be used as a weapon against their own father, to control you forever. So I am running. I am writing another, crueler note for you to find, a note so cold it will cauterize the wound, make you hate me, make it easier for you to let go. And I am creating a new story for our baby, a story where her father was a hero, a poor, brilliant man who would have adored her, whose love for me was pure and uncomplicated by wealth or power. A man who was tragically taken from us, so there is no wound of abandonment, only a legacy of beautiful, perfect love. It is the kindest lie I can think of. Please don't look for me. Please live the incredible life you are meant to live. Be the titan she wants you to be, and then beat her at her own game. Find a good woman, a woman strong enough for your world, and be happy. Know that I will love you, and only you, until the day I die. You were not a chapter in my life, Jules. You were the whole book. Yours always, Evelyn. The letter ended. Maya slowly folded the fragile paper, her hands numb. The room was utterly silent. The truth was here, and it was so much worse than she had ever imagined. Her mother hadn't been a liar in the way Julian feared. She hadn't been cruel or fickle. She had made an impossible, heartbreaking choice. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her one true love, to protect her unborn child, to protect Maya from a woman who wielded power like a weapon. The story of the dead hero father wasn't a betrayal. It was an act of fierce, desperate maternal love. And Julian Croft, he wasn't a villain who had abandoned her mother. He was a victim, just as she was. He had lost the love of his life and the chance to know his own daughter because of a calculated, cruel threat made 22 years ago. His skepticism wasn't malice. It was the deep, ingrained pain of a man who believed the lie designed to save him. The tears that came now were not of anger or confusion. They were tears of profound, soul-deep sorrow. Sorrow for her mother's lonely life, for the love she gave up. Sorrow for Julian, for the decades he'd spent hating the wrong person. And sorrow for herself, for the father she never knew she had, and the truth that had just broken her heart into a million pieces. She looked over at the oddly written sheet music, Maya's lullaby. It was the only piece of this puzzle that didn't yet fit. The next day passed in a blur of grief and resolve. The sorrow was a heavy weight in her chest, but it was now mingled with a new, urgent sense of purpose. 2 lives, 3 lives had been derailed by this secret. Julian Croft deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know why Evelyn had left. He deserved to know he had a daughter, and that he hadn't been betrayed, but protected. She found the number on the business card. It felt like lifting a 100-pound weight to press the call button. Beatrice Vance answered, her voice as crisp and efficient as ever. Mr. Croft's office. It's Maya Linwood, she said, her own voice sounding foreign and distant. I need to see him. It's important. There was a slight pause. Mr. Croft has cleared his schedule for you, Miss Linwood. He said to let him know whenever you called. He can see you immediately. An hour later, Maya was back in the penthouse office. The magnificent view seemed less impressive today, the city below a muted gray. Julian was standing by the window again, but this time he turned the moment she walked in. The question was etched on his face, a mixture of hope and dread. He had clearly been waiting in agony. Maya didn't say a word. She simply walked to the coffee table and placed 2 items upon its polished surface, the yellowed, unsent letter and the strangely written sheet music. He looked from the papers to her face, his expression confused. I found these, she said, her voice quiet but steady. The letter, it's from her. It's for you. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the letter. He sat down heavily in the armchair and began to read. Maya watched as a lifetime of emotions played out across his face. Confusion turned to shock. Shock gave way to a dawning, horrified understanding. By the time he reached the part about his mother's threats, a low, guttural sound of anguish escaped his lips. When he read about the baby, About her, the mask of the billionaire shattered completely, revealing the broken heart of the young man who had lost everything all those years ago. When he finished reading, he didn't move. He just stared at the letter, his shoulders slumped. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek and fell onto the page, mingling with ink that was already 22 years old. "All this time," he whispered, his voice ragged with disbelief and fury. "All these years, I thought she stopped loving me. I thought, I thought it was me. I drove myself mad trying to figure out what I did wrong." "She never stopped loving you," Maya said softly, the words feeling both inadequate and essential. "She did this because she loved you, and she did it to protect me." He finally looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain so immense it was difficult to witness. It was the pain of 2 decades of unanswered questions, of a life not lived, of a daughter he never knew he had. "My mother," he said, his voice laced with a cold, quiet rage that was more terrifying than any shout. "Her pride, her obsession with legacy. She destroyed 3 lives with a single, polite conversation." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "The irony is, I cut them out of my life 5 years after Evelyn left. I built this empire on my own terms, without their help, without their approval. I did it all to prove that I didn't need their world. But she was already gone." The silence in the room was vast, filled with the ghosts of what might have been: a father, a mother, a daughter, a family that never was. Arthur slowly stood up and walked over to her. He was no longer the imposing titan of industry. He looked old, tired, and profoundly sad. He stopped a few feet away, as if unsure of the protocol for meeting the 21-year-old stranger who was his child. "You have her eyes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The same fire, the same spirit." He gestured toward the sheet music. "What is this?" "I don't know," Maya confessed. "She called it Maya's lullaby, but I've never seen it. I tried to play it through in my head. It doesn't sound like her. It's clumsy. The notes don't make sense together. It's like a child wrote it." Julian picked it up, his brow furrowing as he scanned the bars of music. "She was a genius. She wouldn't write something ugly." An idea, faint and improbable, sparked in Maya's mind. A memory of a game her mother used to play with her, a simple substitution cipher using the letters A through G, the letters of the musical scale. Clumsy, like a child wrote it. A code. "My mother was meticulous," Maya said, thinking aloud. "Every note she wrote had a purpose. What if the notes aren't meant to be played? What if they're meant to be read?" She pointed to the first few notes on the staff. E, G, G, that's a word. B, A, G, another word. What if this whole thing isn't a song? What if it's a message? For the next hour they worked together, hunched over the coffee table like 2 code breakers. A father and daughter, strangers just days ago, now united in a singular purpose, deciphering the final secret of the woman they both loved. They transcribed the notes into letters, and slowly a message began to emerge from the dissonant melody. "My dearest Maya, if you read this, it means you found him and you know the truth. The key is in the heart of Chopin. Nocturne Opus, Barney 9. No 2, the proof is in the Bank of New York safe deposit box. 8021, she cannot deny what she wrote. Be brave, my love, the heart of Chopin." Maya knew instantly. Tucked away in the box of memories was her mother's most treasured volume of sheet music, the Chopin Nocturnes. It was worn and falling apart, the pages soft as cloth. She had played from it 1,000 times. "I know where the key is," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Their journey back to her small Astoria apartment was a silent, charged mission. In front of the dormant upright piano that had belonged to her mother, Maya opened the old Chopin book. The binding was loose, and with gentle pressure, she found a small, hollowed-out section carved into the thick pages. And inside, wrapped in a piece of silk, was a small, ornate silver key. The days that followed were a surreal exercise in navigating a new reality. There was no magical transformation, no grand cinematic moment where Maya's life of ramen and bus passes was suddenly swapped for one of caviar and chauffeured cars. The truth hadn't brought a fairy tale ending. It had unearthed a fragile, complicated, and utterly terrifying beginning. The chasm between Maya Linwood, the waitress from Queens, and Maya Croft, the secret daughter of a billionaire, felt miles wide. Their first attempt to bridge it was a disaster. Julian, in a well-intentioned but clumsy gesture, made a reservation at Oriole, a restaurant where the tasting menu cost more than Maya's monthly rent. She sat stiffly in a dress he'd had Beatrice purchase for her, feeling like a child playing dress-up. "Mom would have hated this place," Maya said, breaking a long, uncomfortable silence. "She'd say the food was trying too hard to be art, and the people were trying too hard to be important." Julian flinched slightly, but then gave a sad, knowing smile. "You're right. She would have. She'd have made a joke about the foam on the sea bass looking like dish soap." He paused, looking at Maya across the expanse of white linen. "I forget sometimes how to be a person outside of a boardroom. For 20 years, this is how I've connected with people. Through grand gestures, through transactions. I don't know any other way." "We have to find one," Maya said softly, but with a firm resolve that was pure Evelyn. "Because this isn't real. My life, the one she gave me, is real. The struggles are real, and you can't just erase them with a black card." This became their first, most significant hurdle. Julian's instinct was to solve every problem with money. When he learned of her student debt, he immediately had Beatrice draw up the paperwork to clear it. Maya found the offer in her email and felt a surprising surge of anger. She called him, her voice trembling. "You don't get it. That debt, I earned it. That degree I haven't finished, I worked for it. My mom worked 2 jobs so I could even start. It's the story of my life. You can't just put a price on it and pay it off like an overdue invoice. You're trying to buy your way into my past, and it's not for sale." On the other end of the line, Julian was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was humbled. "You are right. I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix the past when I should be trying to build a future." It was the first of many lessons he would have to learn about his daughter. She did not want a benefactor. She wanted a father. Armed with the key from the Chopin book and a court order Julian's lawyers had procured with quiet efficiency, they went to the Bank of New York. The safe deposit box was old, the metal cool to the touch. Inside there was only one thing, a thick manila envelope, and inside the envelope were 2 documents. The first was a sworn, notarized affidavit from Evelyn Linwood, dated 22 years ago. In it, she detailed the meeting with Eleanor Croft, quoting her threats verbatim. It was a harrowing, meticulous account of the coercion she had faced. The second document made Maya's blood run cold. It was a handwritten letter to Evelyn on heavy, monarch-embossed stationery. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and utterly merciless. It was from Eleanor Croft. It confirmed everything. A follow-up to their meeting, outlining the arrangements and consequences should Evelyn fail to comply. It ended with a single chilling line. "A child can be such a fragile thing. It would be a tragedy if its life were to be complicated." It was the smoking gun. Hard, undeniable proof. "What are we going to do?" Maya asked, her voice a whisper. Julian's face was like carved granite, his eyes burning with a cold fury she had never seen before. "We are going to end this. Not with lawyers, not with the press. We are going to end this with the truth." The drive to the Croft family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was the longest of Maya's life. It was the gilded mausoleum her mother had described, a sprawling stone mansion surrounded by acres of manicured, soulless gardens. Eleanor Croft was waiting for them in the grand drawing room, a space so formal and perfect it felt like a museum exhibit. She was in her late 70s but carried herself with the unbending posture of a queen. She was beautiful, elegant, with eyes the color of ice chips. The Dragon Lady. "Julian," she said, her voice smooth as silk, completely ignoring Maya. "What an unexpected surprise. And you've brought a guest." "This is not a social call, Mother," Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "This is Maya Linwood, Evelyn's daughter." Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and calculating appeared in her eyes. "Ah, yes, the waitress. I heard about the little scene at the Pinnacle. I assume you're here for a payout. Name your price, dear. I'm sure we can come to a satisfactory arrangement. It was Maya who stepped forward, clutching the envelope. Her heart was hammering, but her voice was steady, fueled by her mother's courage. We're not here for your money, Mrs. Croft. We're here for an accounting. She laid the documents on the polished mahogany table between them, the affidavit, and Eleanor's own damning letter. Eleanor glanced at them, her expression of regal calm finally beginning to crack. For the first time, a hint of genuine emotion, not anger but fear, showed on her face. These are fabrications, the desperate scribblings of a spurned, unstable woman. Is this your handwriting, Mother? Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet as he pushed the handwritten letter towards her. Did you write about how fragile a child can be? The room was utterly silent. The ticking of a grandgather clock was the only sound. Eleanor Croft, the untouchable matriarch, stared at her own words, written 2 decades ago, and was finally irrevocably cornered. Her carefully constructed world of power and plausible deniability crumbled to dust. I did what I had to do, she finally whispered, the words brittle and sharp, to protect this family, to protect you from your own foolish sentimentality. She would have ruined you. You didn't protect me, Julian said, the grief and rage of 22 years finally boiling over. You hollowed me out. You stole my life. You stole my daughter. This family you were so desperate to protect. As of this moment, it no longer includes you. He looked at Maya, his expression softening. Our family starts now. They walked out of that house without looking back, leaving the dragon lady alone in her gilded cage with the ghosts of her deeds. The journey back to the city was different. The heavy weight of the past had been lifted, replaced by the light, terrifying prospect of a future. They didn't have the 22 years they lost, but they could build something new on the foundation of the truth. That evening, they didn't go to a fancy restaurant. They went back to the small apartment in Astoria. Julian stood awkwardly in the cluttered living room that smelled of lavender and old books. A billionaire completely out of his element and completely at home. She would be so proud of you, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Maya. Maya walked over to the old upright piano. She sat down and placed the sheet music for Maya's lullaby on the stand. Her fingers, hesitant at first, found the keys. She began to play, and this time, the notes were not clumsy or ugly. Freed from their coded message, played with the understanding of the sacrifice and love they represented, the melody was beautiful. It was a simple, heartbreaking lullaby, full of longing, of sorrow, and of a fierce, undying hope. It was the song of a mother's love, reaching across the years to finally bring her daughter and the love of her life back together. Julian sat on the worn piano bench beside her, and for the first time listened to the song his Evelyn had written for their daughter. The music filled the small apartment, a father and daughter united at last, beginning a new symphony on the other side of silence. The ocean between them was still vast, but for the first time, in the soft light of home, they could finally see the opposite shore.